driving home with Kelly after a long Saturday in Jacksboro, celebrating a really neat event, a friend of mine, 50th year anniversary. I looked at him and I thought, hon, I'm just tired. It's been a long week. It's been a long year. And I'm not going to sit up here and recount all the things that's happened this year that to me has made it kind of a long year, but it's been a long year. And I think it's kind of ironic that this morning Barry brings out the idea in his class, and we looked at the theme pretty consistently of quit whining. And so I'm thinking that boy was listening in on my pickup conversation with my wife about me whining about how it's been a tough week, it's been a tough year. But, you know, it's a scriptural thing to quit whining. And we've known, normally we look at this chapter 12, and we hit those first three verses, and we've done that here on occasion, looking at what we're supposed to do and how we go back to chapter 11 with all of these great examples of faith and how we need to buck up and get after it, stay with it, and consider yourself, consider him who endured. All of a sudden in verse 3 in chapter 12, it changes gears back to the theme of the entire book of Hebrews, because Hebrews is not about all these giants in the faith. It really isn't. It's not all about Moses. It's talked about it. It's not even all about Melchizedek. The whole of Hebrews is about how Jesus is our example. And so when you get through all of these examples, this is basically in verse 3, the start of where we went to when we started the whole shop with Hebrews. Jesus is the one. Jesus is greatest. Jesus is our example. Yes, we've been given all of these examples, but Jesus is the one that's our example, and I think in verse 3, that's where they should have started chapter 12, but nevertheless, that's just Jeff's opinion. But in chapter 12, verse 3, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself. I don't know whether you've ever considered the life of Christ, but the minute he began his ministry, it was 3 years of pure misery. Think about it. The people that were supposed to be the ones he came for to start with, the Jew first and then also the Greek or Gentile, it's his own people that gave him the greatest grief, particularly those who were in leadership who should have known better. And we get a hint of this in John 3 at the very beginning of his ministry when Nicodemus comes to him by night and says, "We know you're from God." Okay, then what's the problem here? That's what I would have been asking. But no, Jesus in his kindness said, "Okay, Nicodemus, let me give you a little lesson here." And then he kind of chides him a little. You're a teacher and you should know these things. And so therefore, you consider all that he put up with there, all throughout his ministry. After a while, the envy and jealousy of those leaders got to him, and they began to just pummel him with any excuse they could find to tear him down. Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know how great your Christianity is or is not, but I have not received that kind of treatment in my career as a preacher. And I know I am a little bit controversial on occasion. I'm terribly blunt, too much. And sometimes I rub people the wrong way. And, you know, if you used to look at an example of somebody's been in a controversy, that would be me. I've had some controversies in my time. I'm still having them. I'm managing them better, I hope. But when you are a Christian, you're going to suffer persecution. You're going to have people not like what you say. As a matter of fact, the punchline to this whole lesson is if you're not being persecuted, you need to rethink your Christianity. Because if you're not being persecuted, if something's not going wrong with your neighbors, your friends, or those you're reaching out to who's beelining it for a state of perdition, and you're trying to help them get out of it, you're going to not be appreciated on occasion. So quit your belly aching, as that long sign says in Kelly's Kitchen on occasion. Quit your belly aching. As a matter of fact, when we do consider the things that we go through, let me use the encouragement the Hebrew writer uses here to let us know it's not so bad. It's going to be okay. God's got a handle on it. Notice, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Let me tell you for a fact, if you're doing your job as a Christian, there will be times when you get weary. I mean, Paul told the Galatians, be not weary in well-doing. Why? Because in due season, you'll reap. And regardless, you'll just reap regardless, right? No. You'll reap if you faint not. You know, the whole idea of hanging tough and staying with it, the Revelation proclamation of, faithful unto death, he told one church there, Jesus did. You got to be faithful unto death. And that's not an easy thing to do. There's going to be times when we get discouraged. But here's a couple of points we might remember, okay? And this is hard to remember. In fact, it was very difficult for me when my dad would line me up over the, or mom would bend me over her checkered apron. You know where I'm going with that. Applying the Board of Education to the seat of learning. And he would tell me, or mom particularly was very good. Now, I love you, son, but this is for your own good. And it's like, I would like some other kind of good besides what I'm about to get. But you'll notice in the next verses, he quotes a verse from Proverbs. And you can either look at that or you can look at the one he quoted, because this is one of those rare occasions when an inspired writer, he actually quotes the Septuagint version, which is a translation of the Hebrew, actually quotes the Septuagint version almost word for word. Very often you'll find a little bit of discrepancy between, or not discrepancy, a difference between the quote that like Jesus made from the Old Testament Bible, because he was quoting from the Septuagint, and then you go back and read your Hebrew Bible, which the Old Testament we have is usually translated from the Hebrew, not necessarily the Septuagint exclusively. And there's a little bit of difference, but this one's almost the same. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father, the son in whom he delights." One of the things that we can know from our life and the difficulties we have in our life, and those difficulties that tend to weigh us down, very often I believe we can understand that God allows these things to happen so that we'll be stronger. And he does that because he loves us. I don't know a parent yet that has spanked a child because they just hate the kid. Now I realize the kid's thinking otherwise, and very often I've heard kids look up at their mom or dad and say, "Oh, I hate you. You hate me because you spanked me. You just hate me." No, we don't hate you. A parent that loves the child will discipline the child in whatever means necessary. And in doing so, they do so out of an expression of love. They want them to be better. In fact, they want them to understand that there are consequences to poor decisions. And when a parent does not discipline, whether it's a firm word or a slap on the hand or a spanking, whatever the case may be, if a parent doesn't do that, they can say they love their child all day long, but they really don't, or they would be teaching them there is a consequence to poor behavior. When a child becomes of age where they're understanding yes and no, and when they're understanding that they shouldn't do something, and when they do there's a consequence, we are bound and obligated, if we love them, to correct them. That's what God's doing very often. How we view our persecutions and trials has a lot to do with how we endure them. I mean, are you looking at them like, "Oh, woe is me," And I've heard this before, and I don't want to bend your ear on this one, but everybody, anything happens bad, the first thing we say, "Oh, Satan's after us." Well, it could be the case. Okay, I wouldn't deny that. But I also think sometimes God allows things to happen in our lives so that we can become stronger. Now, what he's doing is allowing us to grow. Because, when you experience a suppression, a trial, a tribulation of some sort, and you come through it, look how much greater things can be after you've come through it. Let patience have its perfect work, James says. I'm still working on that one. I'm still working on getting my patience where it needs to be so I can see that perfect work. Because very often it's the case I don't keep my patience like I should. I don't get to see that perfect work. It doesn't do me any good. All I have is regret and resolve to do it better next time. Because when you do exercise that discipline with yourself and get yourself under control, which Paul said he was always doing, lest after preaching to others he himself become a castaway, then you get to enjoy the fruits of the patience. And so therefore, when we look at where we are, we need to understand kind of what he says when he says in verse 4, and honestly, I laugh when I read this because somewhere along the line I heard somebody make the statement, "You're not dead yet." And that's what he was pointing out. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. I want to tell you what, the Hebrew writer is slapping his audience here, telling them, why are you belly aching? Why aren't you transitioning? Why don't you use these examples I gave you in chapter 11? Have you considered Christ and what he went through? And you're telling me, woe is me. You ain't dead yet. You have not suffered so much that you've been killed and martyred for your faith. Not likely any of us will either, by the way. We live in a free country that allows us to meet here like we're doing today without any fear of the government marching in at this point and trying to tell us we can't worship anymore. We are so blessed in this country. If we're going to accept correction from God, that makes us sons. He loves us, that's why he corrects us. But the point that's on the contrary side of that pendulum swinging from one end to the other, and I went ahead and had Ronnie read the King James translation of this. The New King James puts it a little bit more mellow in chapter 11, verse 8. If you are without chastening. So see, if you're with chastening, if you realize that much of what life is a schedule of transitions we go through in order to be better Christians. That's what verse 1 and 2 in this chapter is talking about. We transition, we look at those that have gone through these and look at the reward they have to look forward to. So that's what we're looking at as an example, particularly our Christ and what he had to endure. So we endure things, okay? We're enduring the chastening because we want to be a child of God. But if we are without chastening, of which all have become partakers if you're a child of God, but if you don't have any, then you are, now New King James says illegitimate. The Old King James uses the old term bastard. Now, I know that's not politically correct for a lot of folks. All of a sudden, you're making judgments. Let me tell you a little secret, okay? God is authorized to make judgments, okay? And if you are not legitimate as his child because you are willing to take correction, then you're not his child. You are a bastard child. You're not legitimate as far as he's concerned. I realize the old term is a little more offensive, but it does get to the point. A great deal of our life, I believe, is a learning curve. I think that's what all life is. And a lot of the learning curve, that curve, and how sharp and perilous that curve is, has a lot to do with how we receive correction. Have you ever been around somebody that just cannot take correction? You can't even hardly disagree with them because in the disagreement itself, they will take offense and decide you're picking on them. One of the things I have learned throughout the course of my working with people and trying to convince them to become Christians, I desperately try to remove Jeff from the picture because Jeff's not the authority. Jeff's an idiot sometimes and doesn't even say things right. The best I can do is always go to the book and use God's terms and God's word because he's perfect and that makes Jeff look better and that's the way I want to come across. But you know, if I can remove me from the picture, then we can understand that I'm not picking at you. I'm not pointing out how you're flawed and boy, you're wrong. Isn't that amazing how offensive that term is? When you get into a discussion and somebody says, well, you're wrong. I mean, even when you are wrong, you get upset about that. You know, I don't like to be told I'm wrong, do you? But the point being, God is constantly, as we read his book, telling us, you're wrong. You need to change. But on the other side, he says, you can be better if you will accept the chastisement of God and change your life. You can be better. Is it easy? No. Are you going to end up taking persecution? Yes. As a matter of fact, Romans 6 talks about the fact that once you change, people are going to look at you like you're strange because you don't run in the same dissipation as you used to. That's King James translation. You don't keep doing the same stuff you used to do. You're different now. And yes, you are. If you're God's child, you're constantly changing, constantly becoming better. And you're going to get persecuted for it. And it's not going to be easy. And we can all sit here and say, oh, woe is me. It's been a hard year. It's been a hard week. When we ought to be looking at Christ and saying, yeah, I've got it easy. It's really not that hard. It really isn't. Look at what Jesus went through. He came to his own, and his own received him not. On frequent occasion, he looked at his own close-knit 12 disciples and said, oh, ye of little faith. On one occasion, his own disciple, who was a leader in the bunch, get behind me, Satan, because of what he was proposing. He goes to the garden to pray right before he's going to the cross and needs all the moral support he can get, and comes back, and what does he find? His own close-knit bunch snoozed him out. They just couldn't manage to stay awake and give him any support. And then when the soldiers came, they scattered like roaches when the lights went on. He's on the cross. And so very few. I mean, he had tons of disciples. While he was healing, he was all that in a bag of chips. He was there. Everybody was around him wanting to heal. But when he's on the cross, who was there? Oh, just a couple of women and one guy. And then when he rose from the dead, there was a whole different story. Now we know what it is to endure and to be disciplined. And because of love, and that's the motivator, because of our love for the sweetness and the preciousness of souls, we're going to be persecuted, we're going to suffer, and it's going to be okay, and we're not going to whine about it, because we're not dead yet, right? If we're not dead yet, we can handle it. We need to encourage each other more often. I know sometimes it just does good to vent, and I'm all for that. I've sat and listened to folks who vent, and I understand, and they understand as they're venting. I can't do a thing about it. The problems they're talking about, I have no control over. All I can do is sit and listen. My argument has always been when Job's friends came to him and they looked at the terrible condition he's in. They sat with him 3 days. And it was wonderful, their support. And you know what blew it? They started to talk. When they started talking, air went down here. Now, okay, sometimes just being there, I know it's good to vent once in a while, but let me tell you something, folks. We are so richly blessed. We have heaven to hope for. We have Christ as our leader, perfect in every way. We ain't dead yet. We got so much to look forward to. We need to encourage each other that way, lift each other up, smile, and carry each other when things get rough. And things get rough in life. It does. In Galatians, when Paul was saying, I'll repeat it again. Don't be weary in well-doing. In due season, you reap if you faint not. As a matter of fact, it's chapter 6, verse 1. Those of us that are spiritual, let's lift up and carry those that are struggling with things spiritually. That's what we do. But we need to lift each other up, and that's what this is intended to do. I believe this Hebrew writer was telling guys, even a little bluntly on occasion, you ain't dead yet. You got lots of potential. You got lots of things that you can do for the kingdom in serving God. And maybe, some soul will see you and hear you and say, I want to follow Christ because I'm seeing what's going on in that person's life. That's why people ask us about the reason for the hope that is in us. They see something's different about that person, and we need to be ready to give an answer for that hope. But they can't see it if all we're doing is whining. So it's a repeat of this morning's Bible class. I apologize, but don't whine. We're not dead yet. Lift each other up, encourage each other, be the Christians we ought to be, and understand it's going to be a rough road to hoe, but together we can see it through. And won't it be wonderful there? Won't it be wonderful when we get to heaven? And all that's been down here, I mean, our broken life, as we're about to sing. That's what I call my life right now. I'm damaged goods. I'm sorry, that's just the way of it. I'm damaged goods. We get to heaven, it'll all be healed. Won't it be worth it then? That's my thinking on it. That's what the Bible teaches. I'd invite you to respond to that kind of an invitation as we stand.